Thousands of years ago, humans had no factories, no modern machines, and no advanced tools for shaping metal. They depended on stone, wood, fire, and their own ingenuity. But then, somewhere in the ancient world, a simple idea appeared. What if a small piece of metal could be driven into wood and hold two separate pieces together? It sounds simple, but how did an ancient human even come up with that idea? What did they make it from? And most importantly, what did the very first nail actually look like? To find out, we have to travel thousands of years into the past and uncover the story of how humans invented the first nail. Long before metal nails existed, humans still needed to build things. They made shelters, they created wooden tools, they built fences, frames, containers, boats, and countless other objects. But there was a problem. Wood doesn't naturally want to stay connected to another piece of wood. If you simply placed two pieces together, they could separate. So ancient humans had to find other ways to hold things together. One of the simplest solutions was rope, fiber, or leather. People could tie pieces of wood together. They could weave materials around them. They could use natural resins or other substances as adhesives. And these methods worked surprisingly well. But they had limitations. A rope could loosen, a fiber could break, an adhesive could fail. So humans kept experimenting, and eventually they discovered something extremely important. Metal could be shaped. Once humans learned how to work with metals such as copper and later iron, an entirely new world of possibilities opened up. Metal could be hammered, it could be bent, it could be sharpened, and it could be formed into specific shapes. But turning metal into a useful fastener wasn't as simple as just making a sharp piece of metal. The object had to do a job. It had to enter another material. It had to stay there, and it had to hold things together. That required experimentation. Imagine an ancient craftsman heating a small piece of metal. He places it on a hard surface, then strikes it repeatedly with a stone or another heavy tool. The metal changes shape, again and again. Eventually, the craftsman produces something long and narrow, with one end shaped for driving into wood. It isn't perfect, it isn't manufactured in thousands, it's handmade, but it works. And that tiny object represents a huge step in human technology. The nail had begun to emerge. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. We don't actually know the name of the person who made the first nail. There is no ancient inventor standing in a history book saying, "I invented this." Instead, archaeology gives us clues. And those clues suggest that early fastening technology developed gradually across different cultures and different periods. There probably wasn't one magical moment when someone suddenly invented the perfect nail. Instead, humans improved the idea over generations. And once they discovered how useful these small fasteners could be, their possibilities expanded dramatically. The earliest nails were nothing like the perfectly manufactured nails we know today. They were handmade. Their shapes could vary, their sizes could vary, and their production required real skill. A craftsman had to heat the metal, shape it, and create a head that would prevent the nail from passing completely through the material. That little head was incredibly important. Without it, the nail could simply disappear into the wood. With it, the nail could hold two pieces together. And suddenly, humans had a much more reliable way to build. Nails could be used in wooden structures. They could help construct furniture. They could be used in ships and other large wooden objects. And as civilizations became more sophisticated, the demand for metal fasteners increased. But producing nails one at a time was slow. Imagine needing hundreds or thousands of them for a large construction project. Every single nail had to be shaped by hand. That meant enormous amounts of labor. And this created another technological challenge. How do you make nails faster? For centuries, skilled blacksmiths produced nails manually. A heated piece of metal would be pulled from the fire, hammered into shape, and given a head. Then another one, and another, and another. The process was repetitive, but incredibly important. Because nails weren't just pieces of metal, they were becoming part of the infrastructure of civilization. The more people built with wood, the more important reliable fasteners became. And eventually, nail making itself became a specialized craft. In some historical societies, nail production became an important industry. Blacksmiths could produce different sizes and shapes depending on what the nail was needed for. Small nails, large nails, heavy construction nails, specialized nails. The basic idea remained simple, but the technology around it kept improving. And then came another major transformation. Machines began entering the process. Instead of producing every nail by hand, mechanical systems could cut, shape, and manufacture large numbers of nails much faster. That changed everything. Nails became cheaper, they became easier to produce, and they became available on a scale ancient craftsmen could never have imagined. But the most fascinating part of this story isn't how modern machines manufacture nails. It's the question that came before all of that. How did humans realize that such a tiny object could solve such a huge problem? And that brings us to the real importance of the first nail. The nail may look insignificant. It's small, it's simple, and compared with modern technology, it seems almost primitive. But sometimes the most important inventions are the ones that don't look impressive. The nail solved a fundamental problem: how to permanently connect materials. Once humans could reliably fasten pieces of wood together, construction became more flexible. Structures could become larger. Wooden components could be connected more securely, and craftsmen could create things that would have been much harder to build using rope or simple bindings alone. The idea also reveals something important about human invention. Innovation doesn't always begin with a complicated machine. Sometimes it begins with a very simple question. What if I do this differently? An ancient craftsman didn't need to understand modern engineering. They didn't need a factory. They didn't need a computer. They simply needed to notice that a shaped piece of metal could be driven into wood and stay there. That observation could then be improved by the next generation, then another, and eventually a crude handmade object could evolve into an enormous industry. That's how technology often develops, not in one giant leap, but through thousands of small improvements. And the nail is a perfect example. The first person who made one probably had no idea how important the idea would become. They couldn't have imagined modern houses. They couldn't have imagined skyscrapers. They couldn't have imagined factories producing millions of fasteners. They simply created a solution to a problem in front of them. And that may be the most fascinating part of the entire story. We often remember the inventors behind giant machines, but some of humanity's most useful inventions began with objects so simple that we eventually stopped noticing them. The nail is one of those inventions, a tiny piece of metal with an enormous impact on human construction, and we'll probably never know exactly who created the first one. There was no camera, no written patent, no inventor's name preserved for history, only archaeological evidence, and the technology passed from one generation to another. So the next time you see a simple nail, remember, its story didn't begin in a modern factory. It began thousands of years ago, with ancient humans experimenting with materials, solving problems, and discovering new ways to build. A tiny invention, a huge change. And perhaps that's what makes the history of human technology so fascinating. Because sometimes the smallest tools leave the biggest marks on history. If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten history of human inventions, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories from the ancient world. And tell us in the comments, what invention should we explore next?